Good evening, my name is Guido Elia. I work at Dante Alighieri School and I teach a course whose title is Reading the City as a Textbook. So it is a course that is especially destined to study abroad students and it involves a multidisciplinary approach to the city in order to foster awareness in those students about the place where they will spend studying their semester. So, today I wanted to talk about Porta Camollia, which is a gate in Siena, a particular landmark, because it is very representative of a particular moment that Siena, the city of Siena, underwent, and to some extent it is representative of a period of Italy as a whole. Let's start immediately with our presentation. Just a second. Okay. So here we are. Do you see the sharing of the video?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So, I would like to start from the title of this conference. I wanted to entitle it "The Wide Heart of Siena and Its Gate" for a reason, because I wanted to correlate this inscription, this Latin inscription that you find on this gate, which is the northern gate.
Here, it's in English.
I'm sorry? Buonasera. Hi. So I wanted to start from this, from the Latin inscription that is on the gate, because the interpretations that that it can have and have been given to this particular inscription may vary depending on the according to the history of that gate itself in relation to the city. So this inscription goes by Cor Magis Tibi Sena Pandit, which I translated roughly with Siena widens its heart to you more than its gate, but the gate is not actually explicated in the writing, leaving it to the it's implicit in the meaning of the saying. Also because in turn it is inspired by this Latin saying, Porta patet cor magis, which means the door is open, the heart even more so. So even at the time it was already evident the meaning of this, at least the literal meaning of this inscription. But in order to understand how this inscription is related to the gate and the history of Siena and the meaning of the gate and the signs that we can see engraved on the gate, we have first to understand its position in relation to the city, quite briefly, and to understand the meaning of a gate and the functions that a city gate had at the time. So the first and the more evident function of a city gate was, and the walls along with it, it's to mark physically the border, the limit between the countryside and the city. It's a division that is maybe more conceptual than physical, because however the countryside is also compenetrated in the city center. But however, this is the first evident thing that a city gate does. But then it also allows physical control over the countryside for the obvious reasons that being the opening on the walls, it's also the point from which the goods from the countryside to the city center will go through, allowing thus the authorities to exercise their fiscal power over those goods and therefore the countryside as a whole. But maybe even more evidently, a city gate is a defensive system along with the city wall. So the way to try to defend the city center from possible intruders. And so the relation of Porta Camollia with the development of the city as a whole is even more important. So just to show you, one just quick moment, I wanted to show you where is Porta Camollia in relation to the city and the development of the city. So Porta Camollia is this one right here, that is the northern gate of the city. What you see here is the present day Siena, but the oldest core, the oldest part of the city is this very small portion of present-day Siena, okay, approximately the hill of Castelvecchio with the area of the cathedral. It was a very, very small city, already fortified in the 10th century, which developed towards north in the 11th century. And here, if you follow the pointer of the mouse, you can see these sort of protuberance of the city walls, of that extension that I was mentioning that took place in the 11th century, that, as you see, goes towards north. And this happens because this street that you see, that was outside the city center of the old town, is the Via Francigena, that was a source of wealth and trade for the city. Therefore, the development of the city needed to go northwards in order to enclose these Via Francigena inside the city center. The problem is, however, of this area, that on the opposite of the hill of Castelvecchio, and also of this other hill that will be enclosed in a second moment in the round of city walls, this particular hill is easily defensible, but the economic reasons that led the city to expand northwards made it expand in an area that was less defensible. And this is very important because of the structures, the defensive structures that have been developed in this area. And so we are going to need to compare from documents, from paintings, we will have to compare the old Porta Camollia with the present day Porta Camollia in order to understand these changes, what they mean in the more general discourse that we are going to see. So, as you see from this picture, this is the area of the cathedral. It's the highest point of the city, which then developed in the valleys around and northwards, which is the direction of Porta Camollia. Again, another picture showing the height of the city in relation to the other parts of it. And this is the appearance of Porta Camollia nowadays. This is how it looks, but it is important, this gate and the changes that it underwent, also and especially maybe in comparison, they're even more evident in comparison to the other gates. And I would like to show you a document which I have prepared that allows us to understand in a blink of an eye that the appearance, the physical appearance of this gate is immediately interesting and immediately catches the eye. Because if we look at this gate, Porta Pispini, I will give you the links so that you can see all of them if you want. This is Porta Pispini. You see there are two entrances. It is very evident that this structure, but just like Porta Ovile, for instance, they were guarded structures that needed to impose a control, a defensive control on those entrances. But Porta Camollia, as we have already seen, is completely different. It doesn't have that square appearance, and therefore maybe also that function. I would like to anticipate before getting to the point. And it is also more elegant than the others. It has engravings, sculptures, and we are going to see what these elegance means on the contrary of the other gates, and what is its particular meaning. So, the position of Siena, again, the position of, the position of Porta Camollia, again, what are the peculiarities of its position that are interesting for us and for what we want to see and we want to demonstrate? First of all, it was the entrance of the Via Francigena. We have already briefly mentioned how this Via Francigena was fundamental for the economic development of the city. It was also in the weakest position because it was insisting on a portion of flat land ahead of it, and we're going to see it a little bit more in detail afterwards. And eventually, it faces Florence, which is the biggest threat for the freedom and the independence of Siena. In order to allow you to see a little more in detail what I mean by weak position, I recorded a brief video clip, and I apologize for its very poor quality, but I'm a very poor video maker. But however, I hope that through these very few images, we are going to be able to understand a little better how Porta Camollia is placed. As you see, on both sides of the gate that you are seeing, the street goes downhill. So it was on a highest portion compared to the rest. But down here there is Porta Camollia. It was facing this portion of flat land. And ahead of it, there was, and there still is in this case, this other gate, this further defensive gate, which again in turn was defending a portion of flat land, which in turn was facing Florence. So it was on an elevated position. If you see, we can see that down there is nowadays the train station, but it was the area of Camollia and the Antiporto on an elevated position, but frontally it was particularly weak, as you can see, because it could allow a frontal attack. So these led to building a oh, here I'm sorry, I forgot, I placed this this frame just to show you how close Florence was. You already certainly know that Florence already in the Middle Ages, in the early Middle Ages, was an extremely powerful city. And it had the will to extend its dominion southwards, and so hence the threat to Siena. And in order to understand how this city gate was, I wanted to show you some paintings, some iconographic documents, so that we can compare the differences and see the new Porta Camollia in the light of the events that happened around the old Porta Camollia. The first thing we know then is that it was completely different, more humble. This is a painting that celebrates the meeting between the Emperor Frederick III and Eleanor Davids, the Princess of Portugal. It was arranged by the Bishop of Siena, Enea Silvio Piccolomini, that will later on become Pope Pio II. And here there is the first document that I wanted to show you. But more important is this document. It's a celebrative painting that allows us to see a little more in detail the defensive system that was placed before Porta Camollia, because of the fact that it insisted on a weak position. Therefore, it had to be reinforced through through heavier defensive systems, such as the already mentioned Antiporto, which is the only part of the former defensive system that is still standing up. These are the structure that was called Torrazzo di Mezzo, so the halfway tower, and eventually Porta Camollia. This painting is quite important, not only because it allows us to see how that area of Siena used to look like, but also because it tells us about the story of an attempt to take the city in 1526. It was a joint effort and allegiance between the Republic of Florence and the papacy that was under it was under the Pope Clement VII, who was a Medici, and who wanted to create a whole Medician state. Siena was in the middle between Florence and the state of the church. Therefore, they wanted to conquer the Republic of Siena, so to make an uninterrupted Medician state. This attempt failed, but it taught the Sienese that their defensive system, although imponent, could not sustain the new warfare machines such as cannons, which had been seen the first time right in 1526 in Siena. Cannons which immediately breached the Torrazzo di Mezzo. As you see, it was immediately destroyed, and it was, although Siena didn't fail, but however, it was immediately evident that other structures, stronger structures, were required in order to prevent the appetites of Florence on the city of Siena to win over the liberty of the Republic. Here I wanted to show you a little bit more in from a closer point of view how this system was imagined. There was the Antiporto, Torrazzo di Mezzo, and Porta Camollia, and the sides were more easily defensible because they were lower. This was the highest point that allowed cannons to shoot at the same height on the city walls. If cannons shooting from lower points wouldn't have the strength to damage the city walls, and therefore this was the point that it had to be reinforced the most. We have mentioned the Antiporto, which is the only part of this defensive system that is still existing, and the rest has completely been demolished. And as I said, this defensive system was heavily improved after 1526. These, however, didn't prevent eventually the Medici to gain control. This time, helped by the imperial forces of Charles V, to take control on the city. It was not easy for them because the siege of Porta Camollia, the siege of Siena, took over 1 year. It began in the January of 1554, and the city surrendered for starvation on April 17 of the following year. So it was a big effort, and it means that this defensive system, however, bought some time for the city, but was not resolutive. However, from the celebrative painting of the attack on Porta Camollia, the attack at night on Porta Camollia, we can have a glimpse, although it's not exactly realistic, of how after the improvements of the years following the Battle of Porta Camollia and the victory of Porta Camollia, these improvements basically consisted in an additional thicker wall that was placed right in front of the facciatone. If we look at the magnified image, we can see that the scheme is the same. So antiporto, torrazzo di mezzo, halfway tower, and the actual gate, the actual entrance of the city. But I have said that it's maybe a little bit exaggerated, because from other iconographic documents, the size of this further fortress facing Porta Camollia is not maybe as big as Vasari, due to the fact that it had to celebrate that event for the Dukes of Florence. And maybe he exaggerated a little bit this thick fortress that was placed outside the Antiporto. However, it was a completely different area from how it this is twice from how it appears nowadays. Another image, another celebrative painting that testifies the appearance of Porta Camollia and its changes over the time, which is not as realistic as those that we have seen previously, but that politically and iconographically it has a more intense meaning for our purposes, is this painting that celebrates the entrance of the Duke of Florence, Cosimo, in Siena after the conquer of the city. And already a few years after, this painting should be dated around 1560, but of course it's not, in this case it's not exactly sure, but we can understand from here that the Antiporto was still standing up, the fortress outside the Antiporto was already dismantled, the rubbles, just like those of the halfway tower, were still on the ground, and there was this temporary triumphal arch that was placed for the Duke to pass through before entering the city. This triumphal arch, although it was temporary, it's an element that is going in little moments to let us understand a little bit better the meaning of this gate, of the gate of Porta Camollia, and especially of the signs of the power that are placed on the gate, and their meaning also in relation to the history of the city that will take place in a time when it will not be anymore a free republic. So let's see Porta Camollia as it appears more or less nowadays. I have chosen a picture that is very old in order to show you that also those side entrances, they are not they don't date at the same time of the same time of Porta Camollia, the same year, but they were performed in the 30s for other reasons, for other purposes, which were the traffic that was starting to be to arrive in the city. Traffic meaning pedestrians and cars, vehicles. So the modernization of the gate in the 30s passed by these side openings that have been performed. But before it was just this entrance, and if we are to see these signs that are on the gate, show you these other scheme that I have drawn, it is going to be more evident why Porta Camollia is symbolically important. Because, first of all, because as we have kind of anticipated, from being a stronghold defending the liberty of the city of Siena, and so from being the symbol of its impenetrability itself, later on the gate has become the monumental entrance of the city, facing the capital of the duchy. So Florence, of course, was the capital, and being the gate itself not anymore a structure that prevented foreigners and especially enemies from getting inside, but now it was a triumphal arch welcoming visitors inside the city. And so the motto, the saying, the Latin saying, "Cor Magis Tibi Sena Pandit," so Siena opens its heart to you more than its gate. It's a saying that in the light of these events can assume a couple of meanings. The first, that is more immediate, is the fact that it was interpreted as a kind of mockery. The impenetrable Siena that resisted for centuries the ambitions of Florence finally was taken, was enclosed in the state of the Medici, and made just a welcoming and not anymore belligerent entity in the panorama of central Italy. But if we see also the other symbols that are placed and engraved and carved in the gate, they are also going to tell another story along with this, because we can see that here there is the crest of the Medici family, and here below there are the signs of the city of Siena, the black and white flag, which should open shortly. Okay, that is the as soon as it works, because it's loading. However, that is the Balzana, as you see, this symbol here, so the symbol of the city of Siena. And here is instead this other coat of arms, the symbol of the people, which was an old institution of the Republic of Siena, which are, not by chance, the same that are placed instead on the facade of the Palace of the Power of Siena, Palazzo Pubblico, the palace from which the power on the Republic had been exercised for centuries. And these symbols, they can tell us two things: that at the same time they meant dominion of the new lord on the city, but contemporary they meant contiguity to the old republican institutions. The decisions, the important decisions, were taken in Florence, but the liberty of the city, at least over its own institutions, although emptied of any real power, it continued to exist, and it went on until the Grand Duchy of Tuscany went in the hands of the Habsburg Lorraine dynasty, which undertook in the 18th century some reformations which eventually cancelled all these institutions. But the contiguity of the institutions of the Republic can allow also us to hypothesize another meaning of Cor Magis Tibi Sena Pandit. So meaning a sort of acknowledgement of a new role of the city after a long and expensive in many terms, especially in terms of lives, but also in terms of wealth of the city itself, the acknowledgement of a change, the acknowledgement of the change of a situation, and therefore the sign of a political class that was ready and eager to undertake a different path with different ambitions also at the same time. This particular interpretation was the interpretation that was not accepted by, however, not even thought in some cases by the scholars of Siena during the 18th and 19th century, which insisted very much on the spirit of independence of the city, but passerbys, travelers, simply saying, they didn't perceive apparently the same thing from what we can see, for example, from this quotation from a journal of his tour of Italy, or in general. That was just a nice and welcoming way to welcoming engraving for anyone who would want to pass from the city freely, as it was not anymore any danger for anyone, because it was by now completely domesticated and enclosed, as already said, in the state of Florence, as a federate city. So my personal opinion is that is kind of halfway, because it is quite hard to say that at that time, in the when the city was rebuilt in 1604, it could have been a message for possible travelers, because it was in time after the Counter-Reformation, when pilgrimage was not seen as it was seen in the Middle Ages, and the Grand Tour was not a thing anymore. The tourism, although in the meaning it had in the late 17th century onwards. Therefore, I personally tend to believe more like that most likely it was just a way of, on behalf of the Dukes of Florence, to remark the enterprise that they had that they had acquired, and it was something that Florence, as a city and the head of the Republic, tried to do for quite some time, for centuries, and therefore it marked the fact that Siena was finally subdued. So thank you very much for your attention.